Hi everyone, welcome to the fourth episode of Conversations with Steven. Yes, wow, it's like fourth episode, wow, just now fourth episode. Welcome, Steven. Yeah, my name is Steven Izu, and thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Of course, you should know that this is a podcast for young people, and it's basically young people talking about the life of young people and the things related to the life of young people. So if you're listening for the first time, I'm really, really grateful, and I am sure that you will learn a lot today. And I want to thank God for the opportunity, because honestly, it was really God that helped me to start this. So I give all the glory to God. Today we'll be talking about God, and last week we talked about love and how love has to do with young people. If you have not listened to that episode, you need to go and listen to it now. Like, yes, you should go and listen to it now. Yes, just if you're listening on YouTube, go to the account and find the episode out. If you're listening on a podcast streaming site, just scroll down and you'll find the episode here. You will find the episode. But in this episode, we'll be talking about God and what he has to do with young people. Today I have a guest, as always, but today is a very special day because I'm honestly grateful to be able to have a very wonderful young lady. She's very smart, and of course, she's a young person. She's one of those people that are very close to God, but somehow they find a way to relate with anyone and everyone. She's a very, very relatable person. Like, honestly, she doesn't, in my opinion, she doesn't really have to spend a month with you to be able to mix with you, to be able to understand you and get along with you. She's very relatable and very nice, very, very smart also. I respect her so much. Her name is Hart, and it's a privilege to have Anna. Anna, welcome to Conversations with Steven.
Thank you, Steven. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Thank you for your kind introduction.
Well, Anna is a student, just like myself, so we'll quite get along. Yeah. Today we are going to talk about God, as I've said earlier, and what he has to do with young people. You will learn a lot today. I am 100% sure. I am so sure that today, if you haven't really learned anything in previous episodes, today you will learn much today. Yeah, so I'll do a little introduction before I bring my guest in. The existence or the inexistence of a being called God cannot be overemphasized. Everyone either believes in God or they don't believe in God. So that means there's a lot to this said supreme ultimate being that people call God. So that means there's a lot we need to know about someone called God somewhere. And hopefully we're going to find out today before the end of this episode. Yeah. So my first question for you, Anna. When was the first time you had the revelation of the existence of God? Like, when did you first come to know that there is someone somewhere who is supreme and who is called God?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a Christian, Bible-believing family, church community. So I would say that from a very young age, I was aware of God's existence. And at least kind of at the intellectual level, I knew that, God exists and that he is an important part of our lives from a very young age. Yeah.
That's nice. Well, how can you relate your current ideas, your feelings, and what you know about God now and then? Like, is there any difference, or how do you relate your current ideas or feelings about God at this very moment and about God the first time when you were younger and when you were young? Yeah.
Yeah, when I was younger, my understanding of God was very limited. I learned about Jesus and about God and his creation at church and with my family. And I knew kind of the basics, if you will. But I think as I grew older, my knowledge went deeper and more personal. So one thing that I think changed my understanding of God, or even why I believe in God, was that, you know, as I got older, and I saw more of the world, and I just grew as a person. I'll just say I'm an idealist. You know, I'm kind of a perfectionist, and I really care about things being right, at least in my mind. And you know, I'm a teacher, and I care about education. I'm very passionate about that, about social issues, social justice, all of these things. And something that I realized kind of in the process of, you know, learning about all these things and becoming more concerned about these things, was the fact that I shared a lot of these interests and these passions with a lot of other people, young people, who don't believe in God, you know, and don't have the same faith that I do. And so at some point I had to stop and think, where do these passions and this sense of morality, where does it come from, right? Because it's great that my friends are so passionate about it too, but if they don't believe in God, you know, where does their passion come from? And I think there was a message that Tim Keller gave that was really eye-opening to me. And he said something like, you know, millennials today, young people today, they are so have such high morals, and they care so deeply about, you know, the oppressed, about the marginalized, about the environment, about all these important things. But because they don't share the same source, or they don't agree on the same source of these morals, when you get down to it, all you can do is yell at each other, because you don't agree on, if you disagree on something, well, what foundation do you have? You know, it's just my word versus yours, right? So it's great that people are passionate about these things, but who's to say, I mean, who actually decides what is right and what is wrong, you know? So for me, you know, it really, really made sense to me that, well, if I am so passionate about these things, about morals, about social, you know, civil rights and these issues, that has to come from somewhere, and that has to have a source. You know, someone or something had to have determined what is right and what is wrong. And, you know, when you think about it, if there is someone or something who ultimately, you know, created or established right and wrong, they have to have all power. They have to be a creator, right? Because who else would have the right to determine, you know, that kind of fundamental truth, right? So, yeah, and I think when you go to the end of kind of the secular mindset, if there is no God, if there is no moral authority or, you know, absolute truth, then what else is there to live for? I mean, why care about, you know, the oppressed? Why care about right and wrong ultimately if there is no ultimate authority and no ultimate judge, right? Yeah. So for me, it's kind of that moral argument that kind of developed as I've gotten older and seen more of the world, that has shaped more my understanding of God and why he exists.
So for you, it became more personal, and then the more you grow, the more your intellectual capacity grew. So you just found out more proofs to the fact that God existed.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Nice. That's wonderful. So, many people, like, just as you've also just said, actually, many people seem to know God as, this supreme being, like, who sits on a very large throne, with glory and honor, and then just dictates everything that goes on in the world. Is this school of thought right about God?
Well, this was to a certain extent what I grew up believing about God, that he was up high somewhere in heaven looking down on us all. I knew that God is loving and is kind and generous. But I think that when I was growing up in the Christian, community, Christian church, it kind of became a religion to me, because I understood, okay, the Bible tells me I need to do these things, I need to not do these things, and I need to, I don't want to make God sad, or I don't want to make God angry, so I need to do the right things, right? And when you look at it that way, it becomes nothing different than any other world religion, right? It's just based on your performance. So I think that when as I grew more into that, just in my own, in my own heart, I think my view of God was more, that he was distant, that he was, disappointed with me every time that I messed up, that he was angry, that he was just very far away, but when I finally, came to this realization that, wow, I cannot do this on my own. I literally cannot be good enough on my own. I came to the end of myself, of my efforts and my, striving. And in that moment, of really vulnerability, I felt God's voice saying very clearly to me, my grace is infinitely more than your sin. And that was when I realized that, no, it's not God, being far away from me, separated by my sin in the middle. It's God standing right next to me, looking at my sin together and saying, I've paid for that, and you need to live free by my power, by my blood and my work for you. And that totally changed my view of God. Yeah.
So God is like a relatable person. He's not just like a dictator. He's a very relatable person.
Absolutely. Yes.
Cool. So you just said that you had a lot of experiences growing up, like how you evolved from the knowledge of right and wrong to this point of a more personal experience and relationship with God. So do you mind sharing any of your personal experiences or encounters with God?
I think the experience that I kind of just referred to, that was the first time that I really felt God's voice or God's presence very, personally and closely in my life. That was when I was 16. So I was in high school at that time. And that was definitely the biggest spiritual breakthrough or turning point in my spiritual walk and in my life. But from that point on, like I said, my view of God was completely transformed, and also my view of myself and my life and my goals. And so I wouldn't say that there have been, lots of dramatic breakthrough moments, ever since then, but I have definitely had this assurance in my, in the back of my mind that I am free, that God is for me, and that he is calling me to a greater purpose than just what I want to do with my life, and that was part of the reason why after I finished high school, I ended up moving overseas, because I feel like my horizons had just been expanded, and
Mm.
I knew that God wanted more
Mm.
for me and for my life than to just stay in my, safe comfort zone.
Mm.
And just it wasn't like one particular experience, but just the kind of the journey of saying yes to God and saying, okay, I will do this, even though it's scary and I don't know what the future holds. I will, I'll follow you. And just taking those opportunities and believing that, God was going to use me and do something, great with my simple obedience. And then taking that step of faith and seeing the fruit and the rewards of that. Not necessarily personal rewards for me, although there were those too, but just all the relationships that I was able to build, all the things that I learned, and the things that I was able to pour into others while I was overseas, and I still am overseas now. But it's just incredible to see how your life changes when you say yes to God, and not because you're afraid of him, but because you know that he is trustworthy, and you know that he has a better calling for you than you could imagine for yourself.
Well, I just learned something from you right now, and you have just said, that when walking with God or when knowing God, it's more of a relationship. It's not like how will I put this now? Like a predator-prey relationship. It's more of a one-to-one relationship where you commune with him, and then he communes with you, and then he tells you to do something, and you obey him, and then you go on, and he takes you to higher limits and to higher grounds. So
yes,
wow, God is going to help all of us. Wow.
Yeah.
Who is Jesus?
Who is Jesus?
Yeah.
The Bible tells us, Jesus is God's son. Jesus is part of the Trinity, the 3 in 1. And Jesus was, there at creation. It says that God made the world with his word. He spoke and it was created. And in the book of John, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he, became flesh and dwelt among us. So the Word is Jesus. He was there at the beginning. He's always, existed as the Son of God. But 2,000 years ago, he became human. He, the incarnation we talk about. He came to earth and he lived the perfect human life as a model of what humanity was created to be. But he didn't just come as an example. He came to be a sacrifice and to ultimately pay for all of our sins and our failures, because we could never pay that on our own, right? So he paid that by laying down his life, but then God raised him from the dead, and because he came back to life, we have the hope and the promise of life after death too. And because he ascended and went back into heaven, we get to have his spirit in us as well. So basically, he is God's gift to us, and he has been the bridge or the ladder, if you will, to restore our relationship to God. And the Bible says that he is interceding for us still. He is at the right hand of God. He is representing us to God, and he is saving us every day. He prays for us, and he's our Savior and our friend, because we know that he has experienced everything that we have gone through and ever will go through, right? So he is our comforter, and he helps us in our weakness.
Jesus is many things, really. He's many
Yes, so many
things.
things.
Well, we've made very good progress. Actually, I have asked you half of the questions that I had to ask, that I prepared to ask you.
Okay.
So we've made good progress. Are there any common or popular beliefs or opinions about who God is that is not right? Like you have talked about a lot. You have talked a lot about who God is and how we have to have a personal relationship with Him. But are there any other common or popular beliefs or opinions or school of thought about who God is that is not right?
I think, like we mentioned before, a lot of people can see God as like a dictator or like someone, far off and kind of angry and just powerful and distant. But I think, maybe a more modern misconception that a lot of people have is that God is just our buddy, and that it stems from truth, because we know that God, if we, have received Christ, we are adopted into His family, and He is our Father. But I think a lot of people take that too far, and they kind of make God into something smaller than He really is. And I think that's natural and that's easy for us to do, because we are human, and it is literally impossible to fully know and understand God, right? But I think that people settle with this kind of image of Him that is very limited and can be manipulated and used as a means to an end rather than the end in itself. I think that a lot of people want to use God for the things that they want to help them achieve their goals, to help get them what they want, to help them feel superior to others, whatever it is. And I've certainly been guilty of this myself. But I think it's really important to remember that we can never fully understand God, and we need to have a fear of Him, because if He is as powerful as He says He is, we should tremble at the thought of being in His presence. And when you look at every person in the Bible who had a face-to-face encounter with God or with the angel of the Lord, they, thought that they were going to die. They were terrified. And I think that is important to remember. Like, why would we be any different? So not to like go too far in the opposite direction and just be afraid of God. He is love and He is kindness and gentleness. But I think we need to stay in a healthy balance in the middle, and remember that He is the Creator and He is the Judge,
God.
And He is God. Period. And we can't control Him. We can't use Him. That's not what He's for. We need to cooperate with Him and get on board with whatever He's about, whatever He's doing. So I think that's just, an important perspective to have, especially in our modern culture.
Wow, that's really eye-opening, and I hope that those who are listening have learned a lot so far. And I have personally learned so much about who God is, creating a relationship with Him, and respecting Him, just as you just said just now. So, what do you advise young people? Because you just explained the supremacy of God, despite being relational and very loving and caring for us. He's still God. So, how can we make a balance? And what is an advice that you can give to young people like me? I'm a young person, obviously, like me, on how to create a balance between God being someone who is close to us who wants the best for us, who relates with us, and God, who is the creator of the universe and who is God?
I think that the only way that we can know the Lord is through his Son. Hebrews says he is the image of the invisible God. So if we want to know God, we need to know Jesus, right? Jesus came to show us what God is like, because he is God, and to show us what the Father is like. You just cannot go wrong just spending lots of time in the Gospels and just meditating on what Jesus said, what Jesus did, how he related to the people around him, how he related to the government at that time, to the religious establishment of that time. What were his priorities? What were his values? What kinds of questions did he ask? And just I just always enjoy reading the Gospels, even though I've read them my whole life. You always get something new when you read them. When you read, and by the Gospels I mean Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which are the different accounts of Jesus' life on earth. And another thing that I would also recommend in the area of prayer is just don't try to be someone you're not when you
Sorry,
pray.
I didn't get that. I shouldn't try to be what?
Don't try to be someone you're not. Don't try to, impress God, or try to, make really fancy prayers, or try to be really good or something when you pray. God already knows your heart. He knows you better than you know yourself. So just pour out your heart to him, and do it out of reverence and and respect, but just help, let him meet you where you're at. And he will meet you there. He is gracious to hear you and to understand your struggles or your pain or whatever you're going through. But his power and all of his character, will help restore you to where you need to be. I just think it's really important to remember that we need all of God. We need all of who he is. And that only comes, understanding who God is only comes through, like I said, Jesus, and through prayer, and through reading his word. Those will help us have a better holistic understanding of God.
Wow. Really, wow. Let me just digress a little bit. Before I started this podcast, a few weeks ago, I was in a specific time in my walk with God, and it was at a stage where I wanted to do something, but it was something was holding me back. I wanted to do anything. I was this is summer, because now I'm doing summer school, so I'm this is summer, what do I do with my summer? And I was just praying to God to tell me what to do. And I visited a few people, and Saraya also started the Pieces project. And our listeners, you should go check that out. I'll put a link in the description if you don't know what that means. It is a very wonderful project started by one of my very good friends, and our very good friend Saraya. So I read an article on the Pieces project, and I visited a friend, and it was just then the idea for this podcast came, and it was just so it didn't just come, it came with the grace to do it. I found myself being able to set it up, do a few things, and I was just so stunned and overwhelmed. And with all honesty, I have learned a lot in just few weeks. This is the third week of my recording, or this is the second week of recording now. Am I right? Yeah, this is the second week of recording actually, but this is the fourth episode. Yeah, so it has been so. I really thank God, and we've not even spent up to 30 minutes, but I have learned so much from you, and I'm so grateful to God for the opportunity to know you and for the opportunity to have you on this podcast. Thank you so much for coming to Conversations with Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.
I have just one more question to ask you before maybe you have something to say in summary. What do you have to say about the existence of God? You've said a lot, honestly, but what do you have to say about the existence of God, despite bad things happening and people dying and all of that? Like you say, some people say, well, this issue has been addressed, honestly. A lot of people have tried to address this issue about God being, about the existence of God despite bad occurrences. But what do you have to say about God being in place and then bad things happen, and most times it's so unfair, and then it happens, and why? Like, why is God there? Yeah. So what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, there's definitely a tension there. There's, kind of this unresolved, tension, if you will. And there's a lot of that in the Bible, actually. If you read the Bible beginning to end, honestly, there is a lot of tension and sometimes unanswered questions. And I think that Christians are not called to be people who have all the answers. I think that Christians are called to be people who look honestly at the pain and the suffering and evil of this world that is very real. But to also be people who rejoice in the power and the goodness of God. And it's kind of this weird tension that we live in. There is a complex relationship between free will and God's sovereignty, right? We believe that God has all power, and God has all authority, and that He accomplishes His purposes. But we also believe that God gives us the freedom to make our own choices. And I think something that I realized a few years ago was that, God doesn't ultimately want people to be robots and to just blindly follow Him. If that were the case, then we would have a perfect world, because we wouldn't have the option to do anything else, right? But because God gives us the freedom to choose Him or to reject Him, He also allows us to live with the consequences of our choices. And there's examples of this all over the Bible, all over history. If you look at it honestly and just read those stories as real human stories that you can relate to, so many people made horrible decisions and still do, and we all make, wrong decisions sometimes. But God works in the midst of that. Right now I'm reading through the Old Testament, the major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and right now I'm in Ezekiel. And there's just so much there about how, God gave Israel a choice. He said, you can obey me and you can be blessed and you can be a blessing to the nations, or you can reject me and you will be cursed and you will be, a reproach to all the nations around you. And they were very up and down, but as we know, they ultimately rejected God. And God allowed that to happen. He didn't control them. He didn't manipulate them. He allowed them to make their choice. But they also had to face the consequences of that. And God used, other nations to bring His judgment on Israel. Even though those nations were evil in their own ways. And after those nations had judged Israel, they were judged by other nations. So it's helpful, I think, to understand that relationship between God's sovereignty and free will when you read the Old Testament. It honestly gives me hope, because if you read books like Judges, Numbers, like you see human evil and corruption on full display. And it can be very depressing, but it helps me remember that no matter how bad things get and how evil our, governments are and how bad these issues become that we're facing today, the Lord is in control, and he will win in the end, because he wants people that choose him and that want to, serve him and participate in his will. He doesn't want robots. So he will, accomplish his will, and he can even use terrible things to accomplish that will and to bring good out of it.
Wow, that is so inspiring, honestly. Thank you so much, Anna. I honestly thank God for your life, and I thank God for the opportunity to have you on. I thank God for the opportunity to have you on Conversations with Stephen. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Yeah. So while we were speaking, a question popped into my mind, actually. I promise this is going to be the last question. So while we were speaking, a question popped into my mind. You just spoke about how we have to choose, and honestly, Anna, now the world at this moment is it's so complex right now, complicated, more than it was 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. There are a lot of things happening. Everything is so volatile, and there is literally everything is so open now. Those days, if something happened in Lebanon, or let's say like what happened in Lebanon recently, it gained a lot of media attention, and for the right reasons, of course. It wasn't a good experience, but for the right reasons, a lot of support came to. There have been a lot of support from different government, non-governmental organizations, and all of that. But the world, what I'm saying is the world right now is different from the world before, like the world 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. So how can one, in this our present world now, how can someone build a relationship with God? How can you build, or how can you start one, and how can you build and maintain one, despite all that goes on in social media and also in the real world out of social media?
Well, I think that the crazy events, the chaos that's going on in the world right now, you have the pandemic, you have natural disasters and things like what happened in Beirut. You have all these, racial problems going on. And I think like what these things can do is they can help us see the emptiness of human ambition and human power. Because really there is nothing new under the sun. I mean, we forget, but these problems are not new. These problems have always existed. And people have always made, mistakes and have, loved money and power more than their neighbor, more than God. And we can look at these things and see how empty it all is without God. And that can help us lean into God more, I think. And that's really my prayer for a lot of these different situations going on these days, is that they would bring us to the end of hoping in things that are temporary and insufficient to save us, right? That they would drive us closer to the creator of the world, who does have the power and the goodness to make, even good come out of these situations. So that's my prayer. And I think if you just lean into God, he will meet you where you are. And, just run after him and try to limit the influence of all the other voices in your life. There's so many voices on social media, and Right now I'm actually kind of taking a social media break just because there's so much noise, and sometimes it's hard to hear God's voice in the midst of all of that. I think that in normal life we do need to be engaged and we need to be, part of the conversation. But sometimes it's good to just take a break and just focus on hearing from the Lord and what He's speaking to you. Sometimes it takes, kind of drastic measures to get to that quiet place again where we can fellowship with Him and hear Him in the middle of all the chaos.
Wow. I have learned so much. I have said that almost 10 times today. I have learned so much, and honestly, I have really learned so much. And what you just said now is really a deal breaker. Personally, I'm going to try to do that, honestly. I have actually done that in the past. There was even a time I uninstalled, not so far away, like just 1 or 2 months ago. Even now, actually, honestly, I do that every day. I take out time for Instagram, take out time for WhatsApp. But, it's more of, we should have extended breaks and try to have more relationship and more time with God. So that's definitely going to be on my to-do list. Yeah. So thank you so much, Anna. Yeah. Wow. It has really been an enriching time. It has really been a wonderful and enriching time. Thank you so much for being a part of this episode of the podcast. If you are listening, thank you, Anna, for coming to Conversations with Stephen. Thank you so much once again. I'm really, really grateful. Thank you so much, Anna.
Of course, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Of course, as I always say at the end of every episode, if you have a question, a suggestion, maybe you don't understand something, or maybe you have a different idea, or maybe you have a story you want to share, or maybe you have a topic you feel we should talk about on here, because as I say, this is a podcast for young people. And we're talking about the life of young people. So actually, this month is our first month of airing. So we have a lot in store, actually. So a lot in store. Like, honestly, you should really wait till September and October when we talk about a lot of interesting topics, very interesting topics. So, but if you have any topic that you feel we should talk about, it should be something that relates to the life of it should. Stephen, calm down. It should be something that relates with the life of young people. Okay, so if you have something that you feel is very common and very personal with young people, well, send me an email, or send an email to cwsteven20@gmail.com. I'll spell that out. cwstepen20@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening to this point of the episode. I'm really, really grateful. Thank you once again. Bye bye, and see you next time.